Hi, I'm Brenda Trombley with WXXI Classical, and I'm so thrilled to be joined by Philip Ying. Hello, Philip.
Hi, Brenda. It's great to be with you.
Seems like only yesterday you and the Ying Quartet were premiering that new piece by Jeff Beal at the inauguration of the new University of Rochester president. And, here we are a year and a half later, and so much has changed. How are you doing? How has the last year been for you?
The last year has been challenging. I think that's the word that everyone uses. But we found a way, we meaning myself and my quartet mates, which is who are my main musical partners, have found a way to make it an actual time of real self-discovery and artistic growth. In many ways, we're helped by technology, of course, Zoom and other platforms. I think it's been fantastic to see how musicians can't help making music. Or I should expand that to artists. Artists can't stop creating. We have to make art. And we do it somehow, pandemic or no. And so certainly the barriers have been more formidable. We miss having audiences. In fact, I have to say that last week, was the first concert since 14 months ago that my quartet actually traveled to and played for a live audience. It was a limited live audience, and they were distanced and they were masked, but it was a live audience nonetheless. And it was amazing. It felt wonderful. I think people were so appreciative of the way music can connect us, the live arts.
Did it feel different in any way, or just more magical than usual?
More magical than usual, because I think one of the things that this pandemic has taught us is not to take anything for granted. You examine everything. I think I saw this in our students at Eastman. Fortunately, all the way back in September, Eastman made a commitment to have in-person instruction. So we were able to teach our lessons and teach chamber music in person all the way since September. That was due to the work of a lot of people, our administration, our faculty being willing to come in, follow safety protocols. And I would say from personal experience over this last academic year that we all had a heightened sense of seriousness, of purpose, that we knew we were coming with great intention to this moment and making music because we wanted to, not because it was easy, not because it's something that we just always do, but you had to think about it. You had to follow the right protocols in order to put yourself in a safe enough situation. The work that the students did this year was exemplary because I think that seriousness of purpose was brought to the fore. You had to be very conscious and very mindful of why you were there and what your goals were through this past year.
Well, chamber music is so intimate, and it seems like, this whole situation has created a whole new level of trust and purpose, like you said. Let me ask, what projects have you and members of the Ying Quartet been undertaking in the last year to help you get through as musicians?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question for us, our journey. Everything started shutting down in March. We went off to spring break at the Eastman School and never came back. Everything sort of cascaded during that week and decided that the students needed to stay home and distanced for the rest of that academic year. And all our concerts, slowly, little by little, even ones a month out, 2 months out, they said, well, let's see how things go. And then they got canceled. And of course, it's been, 14 months for us. So come around July, we had taken a hiatus from playing quartets. It was the longest break that we'd ever taken since starting our quartet back in, we started as students at the Eastman School with the Cleveland Quartet in 1988. So ever since that time, the period from March to July was the longest that we'd ever not played string quartets together since our founding. So that felt significant. But by July, and we felt very lucky to be here in Rochester because things felt manageable and quiet, a great community. People, I think, took it seriously here, and we kept each other safe for the most part. By July, we felt like it was safe enough for us, distanced and masked with air filters, that we could finally start playing together. So we started rehearsing in July, and we said, well, for the next 9 months, we can't count on any concerts. What should we do? And we said, I know, let's learn all the Beethoven quartets that we haven't covered with Robin Scott, who had joined our quartet 4 years before that point. There's nothing that helps a quartet grow more than climbing what people call the Mount Everest of the string quartet, and that's the complete Beethoven string quartets. So I said, let's learn them all. And also it was on our minds, it was on everyone's mind because it's the 250th anniversary. 2020 was the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. So we dove in and we started reevaluating, plumbing the depths, the spiritual depths, the technical challenges of all the Beethoven string quartets. We eventually wanted to share them. There's nothing that completes the circle than a live performance with an audience. That was out of the question. So the next best thing is to share it via the internet. And so we found partners. The Chautauqua institution had production facilities. The Eastman School, of course, is a partner of ours, and the Bowdoin Music Festival, where my brother Dave and I, our artistic directors, also became a partner. And we presented a majority of the Beethoven string quartets between fall and the spring. We just played Opus 131 last weekend over at Chautauqua and shared it over the internet. It's been a great journey for us. Definitely not time wasted. I would repeat this year for anything, but the time and space it afforded us to grow together without the pressure of concerts actually was a great experience in the end.
What about listening? I mean, normally you'd be sitting just a few feet away from each other. You said you were distanced as a quartet. Did you feel safe enough to sit in your usual configuration? How did it change the way you played?
Well, 6 feet apart, which turns out to be not too much farther than we normally sit. So the actual physical distance between us proved not to be too much of a challenge, at least for us. Harder for wind players and singers. They had to do 12 feet. That was sort of the starting protocol for them. Actually, I think for singers, it might have been even more than 12 feet. So it's a challenge for some musicians to overcome that greater physical separation. For us, it wasn't too much more. But string quartets sometimes, as a way of exercising, will rehearse with their backs to each other or rehearse in the four corners of a room. Sometimes string quartets will do that even when there's not a pandemic, just to shake things up in terms of communication. So in this case, you don't take it for granted that you can communicate within 4 feet of each other, but you have to literally send your energy a greater distance and absorb that energy at a greater distance. And it teaches you more. It teaches you, as you say, how to listen at a higher level.
Wow, I didn't know that. So you basically had already grown tentacles that you could listen, like long range distances.
Well, yeah, and that brings up another interesting aspect of playing string quartets and chamber music is how much eye contact does one need to make? And you'll see groups do all different things. You'll see some groups that make a lot of eye contact and they're smiling and they're looking at each other. And then some groups that seem to make very little. All I can say, I think we're on the side of making less eye contact than more eye contact, but it's different for every group. And every group learns the way they communicate best. A great example of this actually is how we've had to learn to teach over Zoom. As soon as we sent all the students home for safety reasons last March, all the in-person instruction went on the internet, and myself and all my colleagues had a crash course in teaching music lessons on Zoom, even the ones of us who said, I will never teach a music lesson on the internet because of the compromise between microphones and computer speakers and delay and all of that. But we had to. The thing that surprised me is, yes, the sound is compromised. We, again, take it for granted that you're hearing the actual vibrations of those strings and that box that's either 10 years old or 200 or 300 years old. You're dealing with the actual vibrations of human being to human being, or of course the voice. And suddenly it's translated all through electronic means. And yet you can still sense, even through a computer, communication. And while it was hard to deal with actual sound, focus and resonance, still matters of communication and of expressing emotion and meaning between human beings. It was amazing to me that could still come through a computer, and that to me taught uh, made the point that it's really powerful, and in person it's even more powerful. And that was something to really enjoy coming out of the pandemic, when we could actually start playing for people in person.
How did your teaching change?
I think, again, the thing that I noticed most is the intentionality of it. That there's an enhanced focus, that you knew why you were there. It made me measure time more carefully. Like it put that much more structure and protocols around what we do. So I made sure that minutes and the way a lesson would progress um, was more thoughtful and counted more. So that was all good. That was all good. I really needed my students to come back, and I said many students chose to come back in the fall. Some stayed remote, but then you actually hear their sound, and that I think musicians know. The microphones and what microphone you use can sometimes make you sound a lot louder than you are, or a lot softer than you are. So sometimes I would be teaching a student and be like, "Oh, that sounds great," and they come back and it sounded kind of small. I'd be like, "No, no, no, you have to play a lot bigger than that. You can't always tell, because a microphone, depends on proximity and sensitivity and all kinds of things like that." So I needed to hear the actual sound to work on sound. But like I said, the working on the meaning of the music and how one communicates that through many other means than the sound itself. Ultimately, it is the sound itself, but there are other ways, conscious and unconscious, that we communicate, and those came into sharper focus, I think, through this pandemic.
Philip, what were you hearing from your students about what their experience was like? What were some things that you would hear just anecdotally from lesson to lesson?
Well, they really valued Eastman's. It was risk taking. Their ability, the ones who chose to come back for in-person lessons in chamber music. Like I said, to spend a whole year trying to make music online, really, it doesn't fulfill what we all dream of and what we know to be the full power of making music and sharing music together. So they were just glad to be back and glad to have that human contact. That's so meaningful to us as artists.
So let me double back to the subject of Beethoven. Were there things that you learned studying or revisiting the Beethoven string quartets that were fresh and new for you in the past year?
Yeah, I think how music on that level is a give and take between you at that moment and the music, which in a sense is frozen in time, is preserved on the sheet as it was left to us. But it really is something alive, because when you work with it for the 5th time or the 10th time or the 100th time, you bring something different of yourself, and you find that the music gives back something different. So playing the Beethoven quartets in these circumstances was different and felt different, and different things in the music spoke to me. I was able to get at certain things in the music, certain meanings that I probably couldn't access if I were different or if I hadn't lived through this time. And that, I think, all great art does that, art of a certain level. I know it sounds mystical and magical. You also find art on that level that it goes deep, and the well is almost bottomless, and you go deeper and you reach deeper, and you see that there's even more depth there. And that was fun to see, fun to hear.
I think a lot of our listeners would agree that what makes the Yin Quartet so wonderful is that sort of fearlessness and curiosity and creativity that you bring to every project, even during a pandemic, that you didn't just sit around for a year, like, what can we do? What can we do? Let's go back to, the early 1980s, late 1970s, growing up in a musical family. What was it like, and how did your parents create an atmosphere where you had that kind of drive and passion to work together?
My parents emphasized education. They just said, "We want you to do your very best at school," and they thought that part of training was music. And we were given a choice between piano or violin. Half of us chose piano, half of us chose violin. I think the ones who were on strings seemed to be having a better time than the ones who were playing piano, at least in our family. And so gradually, we all, my siblings and myself, all gravitated towards the strings, and eventually we had the right instrumentation for a string quartet. In the context of growing up, though, it was really just do your best, get good grades in school as to the best of your ability, practice for your lessons every week, but no intention that any of us would become professional musicians. That was a surprise to my parents. But I kind of blame them too, though, by allowing us to go to summer music camps and festivals rather than forcing us to get jobs or work in the summer. They said, if you love music and you want to study music, choose a camp, choose a festival to go to. For me, that those experiences where I really fell in love with music. When you're surrounded by other people who are on that same journey and care with the same passion and have teachers and mentors around you who have lived that life, it's hard not to say, wow, all of life could be a summer music camp. Of course, there are the responsibilities that you eventually face that you don't face when you're a teenager at a summer music camp. But the power of music that you experience, playing a Beethoven quartet for the first time, or whatever symphony for the first time, it grabs you and it doesn't let go.
Was there a light bulb moment for you in those circumstances, like a certain piece of music that you're playing that you got sort of an electric shock, or was it just sort of a gradual drift into becoming a musician?
For me, in one sense, it was a gradual drift. When I went away to college, I still wasn't sure that I wanted to do professional music, even though I knew I loved it. But there were many other things to do in life. So I originally chose to go to Harvard because I thought it was a place where I could explore everything on a very high level. Eventually made it to Eastman, and music became my life. On another level, as you suggest, I can remember really clearly the circumstances of my first time to study a Bartok quartet or a certain Beethoven quartet, or you name that piece in the repertoire, and I can tell you when and how I first studied that piece, Dvorak American, Debussy String Quartet. I know when and where I played that. It made such an impression on me. And now, having made it through a lot of the repertoire, I kind of miss. I'm so excited when you do a premiere of either a new piece or a piece that we've never played before, because there's only one time when you can perform it for the first time, and after that, it's not the first time anymore. And of course, gains in depth and other meaning. But that first time of discovering another great work of art happens once, and that's it in your life.
Well, speaking of repertoire, I mean, we're at this really interesting watershed moment. It feels like for a lot of storied institutions in terms of, still playing Beethoven and Dvorak, but also, discovering new composers like Florence Price and Jessie Montgomery. Now, the Jung Quartet has always had an appetite for new music and has always, been on the cusp of commissioning things. But where are you in that journey in terms of expanding your repertoire and working on things right now that you think are really exciting?
Last week, I mentioned that we played our first actual concert that we traveled to in Indianapolis. And for that concert, they asked us to learn a septet by Ellen Zwillich, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning composer who I think makes her home in Florida. We had never played that piece, even though it's not a brand new piece. It's written for string quartet and piano trio. So we learned it and premiered it on that occasion. So that was a chance for me to perform a piece for the very first time. That was really exciting. I love that process. Right now, our quartet has commissioned the composer Derek Bramell to write our next piece, and that should be coming, I think, about a year from now. So we're really excited about that. It's the idea of, or the opportunity to create new music with living composers, to carry on this tradition and to try with them to extend this art form that means so much to us as human beings. It's special.
Absolutely. Well, summer festivals are, happening again. You are the co-director at the Bowdoin College Summer Music Festival. I understand, you had to take last year off. What does it look like for this summer?
We are actually taking the chance, as are many festivals, not every festival, many festivals, of saying, look, there's nothing like in-person music. We believe that we can do this safely. So we're going to go for it. We have testing in place. We are, in the end, going to require vaccinations. unless there's a reason why someone can't have a vaccination. So we'll do our best to keep everyone safe. But we are going to go for it in person. And I can't wait. It's been a year. People were so sad to miss the heightened community of being in a beautiful place. We were talking recently about being in Maine and how gorgeous that is. So it's no wonder that musicians choose to go to places like Colorado or Maine when they think about doing a summer music festival. Bowdoin College is actually our host. We're independent of Bowdoin College. It was founded with Bowdoin College, but we're now an independent entity. So it's the Bowdoin International Music Festival. Bowdoin College is helping us out a lot in this case with giving us the facilities and helping us with protocols. It won't feel like a normal festival. We'll have to simplify some things that we normally do. We'll have to think about how chamber music rehearses. But the joy of being back together again after not being together last summer and all of us being home teaching through computers, I think the joy is going to be overwhelming of gathering again for music.
Absolutely, 100%. I miss hearing live music and look forward to hearing you all play soon, I hope. Thank you so much, Philippine, for joining us.
Thank you, Brenda.
I'm Brenda Trombley with WXXI Classical.